So we're going to jump into the Renaissance, but before we do, we are going to look at what comes next in the course, because this course is halfway over and the Renaissance stamps the halfway point. This lecture is Renaissance, Baroque, and Mannerism. And that's because I bunched those together. You can actually see the dates here overlap on pretty much everything. So as far as this page goes, we start with 1400 AD and we get to 1850. So have everything in between. The Renaissance is considered the highest period in art. Baroque is a part of Renaissance. Mannerism is also an extension of Renaissance. Then we will cover Rococo, Neoclassicism, and Romanticism in one lecture. The next lecture after that will be modern art. And I put together everything that's on this page into modern art. We have this huge overlapping of time. So it's basically the mid 1800s until the 1930 is modern art. It's all going to be presented in one slideshow until we get to this is going to be the next lecture, which will be basically 1900 and on, and that will go into surrealism, cubism, Dadaism, pop art, all going to be on one lecture. So I'm giving you a sneak preview. And then we move into photorealism to present day art. And as we all know, we are in an era of AI computer art. In fact, you could almost call this a renaissance of sorts. In fact, most of our movies today are at its peak as the CGI and the quality. So we'll be at the height of our digital movie making in this particular time period that we're living in. And then we'll slowly start to talk a little bit about computer art and the effect on art in general and artists. So while you're looking at this lecture and taking notes on the Renaissance lecture, which I'm about to start, I would like you to keep in mind that we're going to cover all of these subjects. And the Renaissance is the peak of art in its creation, in its essence. And then we get to here, which is where we are today. And I'd like to talk about how we've come full circle and keep that in mind as we go through the lecture. Just kind of summarize where we're headed and how the class is going to complete. At the end of the semester, we're going to have a final quiz that you can have, of course, open notes for. I'm going to be posting about that soon, but I don't want to get you overwhelmed because I really want you to focus on your midterm, and that is still a lot of people have to do that paper. And the midterm, as I said before, is everything that we've covered up until now. You don't get to cover the Renaissance in the midterm. That is an option for the final project, which is going to have more flexibility and freedom in it versus just a paper. You get to pick a subject. So I want you to start thinking about that now. It's going to be either an art project, a slideshow, or a paper. You'll have many more options to present your knowledge. And you get to pick a similar thesis, but from Renaissance on. Okay? But don't get overwhelmed and start thinking about that right now. Just keep it in the back of your head as we go through the lecture. So right now we are in Renaissance. We are going to cover Renaissance, Mannerism, and Baroque. That's all we're covering in this slice of information, okay? So the Renaissance is what most people think of when they think of art. It literally means rebirth, and it is the rebirth of the classical Greek and Roman times. It emphasizes humanism, individualism, and is characterized by its use of perspective, proportion, and as we know, there are some famous artists in this time period. So what I want you to focus on in this particular lecture is the idea of rediscovering the human as an individual, because individualism is the key. The rebirth of and the rediscovery of the renewed classical, Greek and Roman times. There was a new interest in it and a putting together and finding of artifacts. And this encouraged people to be interested and relive the Greek and Roman times. Humanism emphasizes the value and potential of each human being as an individual. Humans' dignity and capabilities and achievements. It promotes education in the liberal arts and sciences. As you can see, these images are Renaissance images, but they are interested in science, astronomy, and everything that came before the Inquisition gets reborn again. There's a settling down of torture, and it still exists, but it's no longer so commonplace. After 500 years, people kind of got sick of it and moved towards a reformation of the individual. And the individualism is a stress on the individual person versus the collective, as the church had already done. So these are the aspects of Renaissance: humanism, naturalism, individualism, and classicalism. Okay? You can come back and revisit the slideshow as is always underneath the lecture. So if you feel like I moved too fast, or if you want to take notes just on the slideshow after you watch the lecture, you can go through it as well. Okay, so the Renaissance is known for its Platonism, and Platonin literally is Plato with an ism at the end. And that's because Plato obviously lived in the Greek times and was a philosopher. And so it's a movement that gained significance in Florence, and it played a crucial role in shaping artistic and intellectual landscapes of the High Renaissance. It's a school of thought inspired by the works of Plato. And as you can see in this painting, The School of Athens by Raphael, you have all of the philosophers, including the female philosopher. Remember, Hypatia, she's in there too, and all the other ones are male. But remember, we went through these philosophers during the Greek times, so this is a very famous painting, the Renaissance painting of all the Greek philosophers. And it's the first painting to really show off perspective, which is a significant signature of Renaissance art. The Renaissance saw a shift from the medieval focus. It shifted from a focus on the collective religious experience, and it began to emphasize the individual achievements and expressions of individual people and the rise of a powerful merchant families. This is very important and very particular in Italy, and the Renaissance starts in Italy and spreads actually in Florence, the heart of the Renaissance. It started here. So the Medici family of Florence had many generations of patrons, and they basically created the time period that we know as the Renaissance. In fact, wherever the money is, that's where things thrive. So if you think of today's civilization in modern day, we have somebody like Elon Musk, who has a lot of money. He's one of the wealthiest people. And therefore, what he puts his money in, what he invests, becomes the cultural norm. And that's because people with money and influence create the society. If people put money into art, then artists become important. If they put it into AI or into social media, then social media becomes important. Wherever the money is backing the system, it flourishes and grows. And during the Renaissance, it's created because the Medici family promoted these artists, and that's how the Renaissance was born. It's not just the Medici family. There was also other bankers and nobility. There was a shift in power from the church to individuals with money, and those are the bankers. And they promoted art. I'd like you to know these artists, and these are the artists that are going to be part of the assignment in this module. And yes, I know in the assignment, you're going to copy and paste the name into Google or into, there's one called Gemini on Google that you can use. And that's acceptable, because what I want you to do is to just get familiar with the name and the work. And by going into the internet and finding the art that associates with the name, you literally then in your mind know the artist and the art that corresponds with it. So for the final, I am going to expect you to know and be able to recognize some of these artists. In fact, it's going to be a multiple choice question, and I'm going to say, is this Leonardo, Michelangelo, or Raphael? And you're going to be able to tell the difference. Okay, I'm not going to make them really hard. They're pretty distinct art forms, and only art that I show you in the slideshow will be on the test. Meaning, if you listen to this lecture and you take notes so you can go back and look at it, you can see I don't show every artist and I don't show all art, obviously. If I'm pointing out a particular painting, make note of it, because if I talk about it and I put it in a slide, that means I expect you to know who the artist is and what time period it was painted in. So these are the artists that are the most famous of the Renaissance. Now, the Renaissance was fond of Greek mythology, and this is a rebirth of the Greek times. And there's the subject matter is of the Renaissance is rich in mythos, stories, gods, heroes, mythical creatures. It's a far cry from the Gothic time period, which is just absolutely, Christian icons. In the Gothic period, people really didn't sign their name. We talked about Giotto, who was the artist who merged Gothic period to the Renaissance. But artists weren't even known for their name. They just worked for the church. And so now artists work for rich people, rich families. And so they sign their name and they're proud of their work. And there's mythological figures that sometimes feel like they're godly or they're religious of some sort, just like this one. And that's because these are all the Greek gods, but they're painted as if they are the Christian deities. Renaissance art loved the Greek mythology, and we're going to see this in everything. So we'll see a lot of Kronos, and Kronos is the Greek god of time, and this idea of father time. And artists typically portrayed him as an elderly man and often eating his child, and all of the mythos start to come to life. So Greek mythology became a powerful vehicle for artists to express and intellectually explore in a safe manner. This is allowing artists and thinkers to deviate from the strict religious narrative while maintaining cultural sophistication and not being beheaded. Greek mythology was safe, and they could either paint anything that was biblical or they could paint Greek mythology. Landscapes became more important, but that didn't really come about until the Romantic period later. But right now we're in the Renaissance, and so the heavy hand of the Christian Orthodox Church is not so far behind, and the torture chambers still are there. So people still are pretty tedious to ready to just paint something completely heretical. But Greek mythology was not heretical, and it was something that was safe to paint. So Renaissance artists frequently depict Greek gods in the clouds, mirroring the iconography of the Christian religious figures. This technique, known as the Olympus in the sky, blended classical mythology with familiar religious imagery. Greek deities were portrayed seated on clouds or in heavenly, idealized ways. So literally the Greek deities, the gods of Greece, became gods of mimicking Christian art in a way. Here's some of the Greek mythology being painted. So let's talk about composition. This is a big time of experiment, science in art. Art is such a big deal, and composition and intellectualism and the fundamental principles of art that we know of today started here. Color theory is not invented yet. That comes in modern art. But right now we have the interest in composition, and the most popular one was the triangle composition. You're going to see this all the time in Renaissance art, and that's because it seems a little stagnant to us now, but at the time it was very innovative and creative. Also, we start to see the Fibonacci composition, which is the golden ratio, and this is one of the compositions that you're taught in art class, and it's very popular in Renaissance. This is where it came about. It was discovered by Fibonacci himself and named after him. And he was an Italian Renaissance scientist and mathematician. And the artists and the scientists were very intertwined. So this is an incredibly perfect composition. And the Renaissance is all about perfection, perfecting the comfort of the eye when it looks at a painting. And the golden ratio is the exact proportions that create the best composition. So let's talk about Leonardo da Vinci. He's obviously the first number one artist that anybody thinks of when they think of art history, and he is deserving of that reputation. So Leonardo was a genius, as we know, and his art spanned science, engineering, and philosophy. His approach and understanding often diverged from the Roman Catholic Church doctrine, and he embraced a new sort of, he was almost interested in paganism, even though he did all of these paintings. Sometimes they'll look through them in a look under his artwork and find that he was having sketches of different ideas, but then he became more conservative as he's painting. He would spend a long time on each painting. A sense of realism and perspective. Obviously, he's amazing in so many ways. And he had a mastery for composition and painting that became influenced all artists who come in the Renaissance, and his work embodies the ideals of the Renaissance, the ideal beauty, the dignity, the individualism, and the attention to detail and perfection. Michelangelo, and he is most famous for the Sixtine Chapel. And the Sixtine Chapel is in the Vatican. It is the most renowned artistic masterpiece of the Renaissance. And its fame is primarily stems from the fresco paintings that he did around 1512 on the chapel ceilings. And it was commissioned by the Pope Julius II. And the scaffolding was designed by Michelangelo himself, so he was an engineer as well as an artist. And he had assistants, but mostly it was painted by himself. The process of fresco painting requires careful planning. It has to be done on wet plaster. And so this is a very physically exertion, as you can see. So we're going to take a little tour of the Sixtine Chapel right here. And if you've never been there, this is quite an amazing thing to see in person. This is a huge project, and it is located in Vatican City. Vatican is its own country. The Vatican City is one of the smallest countries in the world because it's literally its own country. And this is where the Pope lives. As you can see, it's quite breathtaking. So Michelangelo had a relationship with religion and the church that was complex. While he worked extensively with the Catholic Church, and particularly under the Pope's patronage, his personal beliefs were more aligned with the Neoplatonic philosophy than the Orthodox Church. And this was actually common amongst artists. Beliefs more along the lines of what was sort of the enthusiasm, which were the philosophers of the day, and that is the Neoplatonists. So even though all of his work looks extremely religious, he was kind of a radical, and so was Leonardo. So he had a connection to the Medici family, and which was significant. And he lived with the Medici as a young artist, and he benefited from the patronage and exposure to the humanist thinking. Later he worked on the Medici Chapel in Florence, and he created the tomb sculptures for members of the family. This relationship with the Medici family, along with his Pope commissions, allowed Michelangelo to pursue his artistic visions while navigating the complex political and religious landscape of Renaissance Italy. So you can see that these artists were sort of the pawns of both the religious people and also the bankers, but They just wanted to create, and so they were excited to be working amongst anyone. And they were also like being housed and paid, and they were treated with a lot of respect. This is Raphael, who is another artist that you should know. Those are sort of the three superstars of the Renaissance: Leonardo, Raphael, and Michelangelo. So Raphael is famous for the School of Athens. So this is a painting that would be on the test, and this is Italian Renaissance, and it's a fresco. So this is a very famous painting, and it's very important that you know that this is Raphael who painted this versus Leonardo and Michelangelo. Here we have Raphael's work, and he emerged as a defining painter during the High Renaissance. He is known for his harmonious compositions, graceful style, and even though these artists are very similar, sometimes there's significant differences in their style. And when you become more attuned to artistic styles, you actually can tell the difference between the artists. In Florence, he absorbed elements of Leonardo da Vinci's techniques and studied with him. So he's younger than Leonardo, and he saw his own style as different, and he wanted to be different from them. And so that's where he sort of deciphers a little bit, even though he has paintings of Christian stories, he also has a little bit of an individual flair to them. And this was very important, to be an artist with their own style and signature. They wanted to have an individual signature in their art, and they did. And this is a unique thing that is just new to the Renaissance, this idea of artists looking different from other artists, and even though they're painting similar subject matter, they have their own unique style. This is Sandro Botticelli, and he's also a very famous artist that you should know. This is The Birth of Venus. So when you see these they're iconic pieces, they're really, you see them everywhere and you don't forget them. So like the School of Athens is Raphael, The Birth of Venus is Sandro Botticelli. And these are important to know, so you have to remember that The Birth of Venus is Sandro Botticelli. Sandro Botticelli painted many versions of the Virgin Mary through his career. This was a common in Renaissance Italy. Importance of the Madonna's religious person in people's homes, and so it was in high demand for patrons. So not only were portraits in high demand, but this particular image was also in high demand. This is one of the reasons we have so many of these paintings throughout Europe. If you go into Europe and you go into museums or churches, you will just find never-ending pictures of Madonna and Child. The painting that is circular in shape is a perfection of God, and so that's why they'd often use a circular canvas. Botticelli's Primavera is a spring, and it's in 1482. It is a masterpiece of Renaissance art and showcases the painter's excellent skill as well as the complex storyline. And this is obviously a picture of Greek mythology and the Nine Muses. And it was created for the Medici family, likely for Lorenzo specifically. He's one of the Medici members. He was one of the highest ranking Medici members who was one of the biggest patrons of the arts. And Sandro Botticelli was one of his favorite artists, so he often commissioned him. And he used models for the figure that idealized beauty. And he had this one particular model that you will see often in his artworks. Botticelli, a prolific artist, as you can see here with his work. These are some of his most famous paintings. He worked with primarily on tempera, on panel, which is a common way to paint in this time period. In fact, most people didn't do oil paint until we get into the Flemish artists. But during this time, we mostly see fresco painting, which is water. He has a very specific style. He'll have like elongated figure. His very unique own signature in his artwork. We're going to move on to Filippo Brunelleschi, and he is most famous for his architecture, which is the dome in Florence, as you can see. This was also commissioned by the Medici family, and there was a plague that was devastating Florence at this time, and they continued to work on it anyway. So this is a fascinating thing that they just kept persevering throughout the plague, and if architects who were working on it were sick or died, they just get new people, and it was like a Brunelleschi is very famous for this dome, and it's one of the biggest domes in architecture and in Renaissance work. Albert Dürer is an artist of the Renaissance. He is this masterpiece called Melancholy. And this is a highly detailed work, and it depicts a winged figure, often interpreted as a genius or the artist's dilemma. Albert Dürer is most famous for his hands, and he's an engraver. He didn't invent the printing press, but around this time the printing press was invented, so he did a lot of engravings, and he became the first artist to become rich just selling his own artwork. Because of the printing press, he was able to make engravings and sell a lot of artwork. This is Jan van Eyck. He is a Flemish artist. The Flemish art have a very particular type of artwork, and Jan van Eyck was a revolutionary because he started with oil paint. So he didn't start oil paint, but oil paint set a new standard for art. And with his thin glazes and the ability of his new technique, he could build up colors gradually, and he created a depth and a luminosity that was never seen before. And so it was actually the Dutch painter Jan van Eyck that became so famous for oil painting and the most realistic and intricate detail that you could even imagine. He often painted very small and with a tiny little brush. He was outstanding in renovating this new style of artwork, which is oil paint. This is a masterpiece that he created in the Netherlands, and art historians have been studying it forever, just mesmerized by its beauty and intricacy. Here is his self-portrait. Jan van Eyck's portrait of a man in a red turban, although it is a picture of himself. Now, self-portraiture is a new thing, and that is part of the individualism, because the prestige of being an artist was so important. As you can tell, you can see he's extremely sophisticated and elegant, and he's painting himself with such intense detail. This has never been done before. To create a self-portrait would be unheard of during the Gothic times, the Roman times, anytime actually. This is brand new, and he uses oil paint and creates thin layers. This is a new technique, and he is an innovator in this. Hieronymus Bosch is somebody that is an interesting artist, groundbreaking Dutch artist, and he is known for his fantastical and often disturbing images. He had a highly individual style that set him apart from all the other artists of the time. You can see he creates mystical, whimsical images that make fun of people and are funny in general. The exact meanings behind his work and his symbolism remain a subject of scholarly debate, because his work is so odd and so different from the rest of the Renaissance artists. He really stands out in his uniqueness and making fun, actually, of the church. He was a comedian of sorts. He is most known for his Garden of Earthly Delights. It was painted around 1510. It is a complex triptych that has fascinated viewers for a very long time. And as you can see, this is making fun in a way of heaven and hell, and middle is the Garden of Earthly Delights. This is the Garden of Earthly Delights. You can see they are enjoying themselves in some strange whimsical behaviors. And if you go to hell, you might be eaten by this bird. So he has quite a fun sense of humor with these grotesque images and quite an imagination. These are some images from his Garden of Earthly Delights painting. These are the hell realms. This is a very common image to use to describe hell, with the face with the big mouth open, coming through, people walking through the mouth of hell, and it's been used over and over again throughout time. Obviously, he was the first to invent this concept. Wanted to just kind of show you that this is a painting of his 7 deadly sins and how it connects to the Eastern world. So his painting actually and the Tibetan Wheel of Life share intriguing similarities despite their distinct cultural and proximity from each other. They both work with employing a circular form, and this philosophy depicting all the realms of cyclical existence in Buddhism, and also the 7 deadly sins show if you do this in this way, you could end up in hell or in heaven, and it's very similar. These ideas are not unique just to Christianity. This is Mannerism, and Mannerism is an art movement that emerged in the late Renaissance. It marked a departure from the harmonious ideals of the High Renaissance and served as a transition to the Baroque period, which comes next. This is characterized by disordered proportions, complex compositions, and unconventional use of color. Mannerism art emphasized emotional expression and intellectual complexity. It's basically where the Renaissance art gets weird. It gets strange. It's like, oh, we perfected art to its ultimate perfection, and now let's see how weird we can make it or what we can do to stretch it. Because we really can't change the themes that the artists are painting. The same themes. They are religious or they are Greek mythology, so they're the same themes over and over again, but I guess artists got a little bored and they wanted to stretch their limits. So they began to change the color palette they were using and exaggerate the features, and they made an impact on art history as a significant development and its own genre. So Mannerism is very particular. It's late Renaissance, but this is the most famous Mannerist painter, and he is basically painting religious subjects, but depicted with a sense of drama and tension and allegory. There's often elongated heads in Mannerism. I don't need you to know any particular artist from this time period, but you do need to identify this time period as it's different from Renaissance. This is called Mannerism, and you can tell that it's distinctly different in its features with its elongated proportions and exaggerated colors. It's also very dramatic, and it has religious subjects, but it's demonstrating artistic innovation, meaning there's a sense of artistic creativity with the subjects. El Greco is the most famous of the Mannerist time period, and he's a Spaniard. So this happened in Spain. As we go into the Rococo time, you'll see that's invented in France. High Renaissance is Italy. Late Renaissance is Spain. This is Baroque art, and Baroque art flourished in Europe, and it's really late Renaissance. This is the end of the Renaissance time period. This movement is a response to the Protestant Reformation, and it served as a tool for the Catholic Church to try to reassert its power and influence. Baroque paintings are known for their grandeur, intensity, and movement, and they do depict religious mythologies or historical scenes. They start to do more landscape painting. There's more drama in it. The key feature of Baroque painting is the use of chiaroscuro lighting, which is dark and light dramatic artwork. And this approach is pioneered by the artists that we're going to see next and focus in on. Baroque sculpture is characterized by its dynamic energy, emotional intensity, and ornate decorative. So Artemisia is who we're going to talk about next. She's part of the Baroque time period, and she is the first female artist that we are going to see who has become famous thus yet in art history. She is a pioneering Italian Baroque painter, and she is considered the first famous woman artist of the Renaissance. She learned art in her father's workshop, showing more talent than her brother. At 17, she painted Susanna and the Elders, just demonstrating her extreme skill and technique. She faced a lot of challenges as a woman in a male dominated field, and Artemisia managed to become famous even though she was challenged in this way. These are some of her artworks. You can tell that there is chiaroscuro lighting. Chiaroscuro lighting is where it's all dark and then it just has one light shining on them, and that's very specific thing that you can identify as Baroque. She often painted women, women in powerful positions or in historical or religious scenes. This image shows a portrait of a painting of a richly dressed noble lady, and you can tell it's Baroque because it has such strong lighting and often a black background. This style of portraiture is characteristic of Baroque painting. In Artemisia's Susanna and the Elders, she was only 17 when she painted this painting. Susanna, the victim, defensively raises her hand against her unwanted attention. This is a biblical scene from the book of Daniel, and she's the first one to depict it as this woman not wanting their offenses or their attention. Artemisia is most known for this painting. There is an interpretation that she painted this painting out of revenge. She was studying art in her father's college, and she was sexually harassed. In fact, she was raped by a man, and there was a trial, and the trial was a harrowing experience for her. They actually tied a string to her fingers and tightened it, accusing her of lying every time she said that it's true, it is true. And there, we know that this story is true because it's actually written down in books. So there were ledgers during trials at this time, and many art historians believe that this painting is a painting of revenge. Assaulter never got punished. In fact, he got away, no problem. She was actually pregnant from this assault and rape, so she quickly was married off. She became quite a famous woman in a male-dominated profession. She was one of the best artists of her time. She was prolific and successful. She created over 60 paintings of high-quality work, and she received many commissions from prominent patrons, including the Medici family, King Charles I of England, and that shows that she was both shown and sought after by influential figures. She was financially successful and as an independent artist and woman, and this was unheard of for her. Caravaggio was a revolutionary Italian Baroque painter whose use of light and realism profoundly influenced Western art, employed extreme contrasts of light and dark to create intense emotional charged scenes. And as you can see, this is very typical of Baroque art. You're going to see that it's almost like it's dramatized as if they're on a stage. This is just a particular style that was popular at this time, and so all the artists were playing with it. As you can see, this is what Baroque art looks like. And you can tell Baroque art because the light and dark are so extreme. He had a far-reaching influence amongst many artists, and this was a huge movement across Europe, and it shaped the developing of Baroque painting. So this is Caravaggio and his art. The transition from Baroque to Rococo around 1720 marked a significant shift in European artistic styles. So after the Baroque, we go to Rococo, which we'll get into in the next lecture. This is the end of Renaissance. Basically, what we have is a perfection of art to the most extreme that it can get of perfection, and then we play on it. So there's twists. Mannerism is a twist of Italian Renaissance, and Baroque is another twist where the people play with lighting. So Mannerism, they played with color and elongation of figures, and Baroque played with lighting and drama. This is the evolution of the artistic influences and styles. You could think of them as fads. So they became popular, and then everybody started to do them. And we didn't cover all the artists of the Renaissance, but we covered enough for you to know the main superstars, such as Leonardo, Da Vinci, and Michelangelo, and Raphael, and the first ever female artist in recorded history to become famous of the Renaissance and even prior. So this is very significant and a great hurdle in history. So the Renaissance marked a time of innovation in art and humanism. And that's it for the Renaissance.